Forget everything you thought about leadership. Today on Womenpreneur Asia, we're diving into the fascinating world of applied neuroscience to explore how our brains, emotions, and relationships fundamentally shape us as leaders. Hello and welcome to Season 8 of the Womenpreneur Asia podcast, and I'm your host, Krista Gun. My mission is to uncover the stories and strategies of Asian women entrepreneurs in Asia to help you and inspire you as you navigate your own business journey. This episode is sponsored by Redbox Studio. Today's episode is with Nandini Das Ghoshal, who is the co-founder and director, Eon Consulting International, based out of Singapore. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. Join us as Nandini reveals why your brain is the key to building stronger relationships, the core ingredient for success in business and beyond. This episode is for anyone who wants to create a safe and inclusive work environment, harness the latest neuroscience research, and unlock your true leadership potential. Ready to ditch the old leadership playbook? Let's go. Hello, Nandini. Welcome to Womenpreneur Asia.
Hello, Krista. Thank you for having me. And I'm so excited about today's conversation with you.
So, Nandini, where are you today?
That's a difficult question. I seem to be always in this flow of, trying to work with my clients and trying to figure out what are their most compelling issues when it comes to behavior of teams and building motivation and building drive to move them forward. Always seem to be, looking for solutions and, building awareness and those kind of things, being a facilitator and a coach.
What is it that you do as a business?
I've been independent since 15. And before that, I worked with a small team and we had an advisory company on brands and brand insights. So a lot of research-based work previously. And before that, I was in the corporate sector. Since 2016, I have been on my own and running a learning company, I call it. And it started with basically a facilitation certification. I first became a Lego Serious Play facilitator in 2013 and started working with corporates on team building and team motivation and, emergent insights when teams work together. So that was the initiation, perhaps, of what I still do today. Parallelly, I started becoming very interested in the human mind and behavior. And I would say that it's no different from what I used to do earlier. I used to basically work on human insights and then feed them back to brands to say that, this is how you can think of how people will adopt behaviors in, let's say, beauty or consumption or food or these kind of categories. But that was very commercial and I wanted to go sort of deeper. Can I work with people at a deeper level? And that's how this whole journey started. If I want to understand the human mind, then what is it that I need to train myself in? And then I got into coaching. And even as I got into coaching, and coaching can be life coaching, executive coaching, but honestly, in my experience, it's all, the distinction is not so cast in stone. When you're coaching somebody, you're always coaching the person. So your focus may be work related or it may be life related, and only that's the difference. But the human being in that whole act is the same. When I started coaching, I realized that there's more to this. There's more to the human mind than just asking questions and getting them to do reflections and all of that. There was much more to it. And that's when I got into applied neuroscience, which is around 2018, when I met Dr. Paul Brown. And he was introduced to me by a dear friend who's also a coach. I took his Science of the Art of Coaching, which is a coach development program. And within a year, I was helping him to run it. So that's how our consultancy, Iron Consulting, came into being, registered in Singapore, where we used to look at as I said, issues that clients face in terms of behavior and coaching. We've designed a couple of programs together. And I am very sorry to share that last month, Professor Paul Brown, who was the inspiration behind this company, passed away. Yeah, so still going on with his inspiration and the work that spawned from our association. But I'm personally interested in a lot of other things, like I'm interested in therapy and I'm also a certified therapist. And I'm also interested in mindfulness, and I have done a lot of different modalities in mindfulness as well. So I can teach mindfulness, I can help clients with understanding what is the neural mechanisms of mindfulness and therefore why must they do it. So yes, so if I look at it that way, I think there's a lot of work to be done in helping leaders and team leaders and company leaders to understand how to best harness the energy of their mind and their brains. And that area excites me tremendously. I think it's going to be a lifelong passion.
As you were talking, Nandini, I was thinking to myself, what would Nandini be if she didn't chance upon that pivotal moment in her life when she got to know about the science of the brain? What would Nandini be doing today if she didn't do this or didn't start this?
Are you asking me to reflect?
because you were so excited when you're talking about how you started and how you came to this business, helping leaders and corporate leaders. But I was just thinking to myself, Nandini found her path. And I think a lot of people are like this, right? Sometimes they find what they like to do, and then they are very happy about where they are right now. But there are also many people out there who maybe are still grappling with issues like, how do you find that one thing that stirs that passion and fire in you?
I would like to actually take this opportunity to reach out to the listeners to say that very often we know what we like. It is just about having the creative courage to go after it. And it is the courage that, we need more than, the path is there. I really have seen a lot of people, they have a lot of different talents, but somehow they don't give themselves the permission. So once you give yourself the permission, the road just appears. And I believe that, and I see that work with a lot of people. And you'll see a lot of people, not me. I mean, if you interviewed so many women, doing so much out there, I'm sure, I would like to hear from you what you think about this. And your own story, you wanted to do something and the path appeared.
It's becoming a kind of blurred lines, right? I'm here to talk about Nandini and her business, and then Nandini now is throwing the question back at me. So what you said is true. I mean, you have to give yourself permission and also have the courage, because I think many times, male or female, I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough permission to take that first step. If we don't take that first step, nothing happens, right? I mean, if we didn't meet, this conversation wouldn't happen. If we hadn't met in the way we met. And for the benefit of all the listeners, Nandini and I met way before I got her on my podcast. So just to think of how things happen in life. Sometimes you meet someone and it may be months, sometimes years before something actually transpires. And when it does, it's actually a beautiful thing that transpires. But we will take time. I guess it does take some time for things to happen. But if it's the right person, the right time, the right conversation, it will happen. So yes, I do agree, Nandini, that it is about permission, about courage, but also giving yourself that one single step. I think perhaps would you agree to that one single step? Did you take one single step back then?
Always, Krista. It's always been that one single step which has made all the difference. So, for example, that one single step when I was seeking somebody from applied neuroscience to actually be my guide, in this journey, and I chanced upon Dr. Paul Brown because a friend of mine, I spoke to her and she said, "Oh, you must get in touch with him." I've always been a person who feels that I learn best from an expert by association, by absorption. I chose to work with Dr. Paul Brown, and for 4 years, I kind of marinated in applied neuroscience. And of course, that's not the end of the journey. It's really, the journey is to constantly walk towards the purpose. The purpose of all of this was to help people with their emotions, with difficult situations at work or in personal life, to help them transit through difficult moments. That was always the purpose. And my approach has always been what's the science behind it? What's the art behind it? Can we combine the two things? I would say the purpose also shows us the way. And when we are down and out, when we, lose motivation, when we have situations where nothing seems to be rising up for us, I think the purpose really kind of holds it all together.
Yeah. So purpose and permission and courage. But Nandini, this is what got me curious. When you were saying you were talking to a friend and your friend knew Dr. Paul Brown, right? So did you talk to a lot of people about what you wanted to do?
Oh no, and that's the other thing that I want to share here, and I share this with a lot of my coaching, clients, is that we must always have a group of people who share our interest deeply. And by a certain age, you should know who they are, or you must identify who they are, and you must nurture that group. And it's a give and take. It's not like you're constantly looking for things that they will tell you. You also have to give. So I think that also enriches our lives. And this is something that I've also learned from Dr. Paul Brown, that I helped him build a fraternity of coaches globally who practice from the lens of applied neuroscience. And today it's called the ION Partnership. And there was no commercial intent of this group. We just meet every month and we talk about neuroscience and how it applies to our clients. So coming back, I knew who to speak to. I knew that I will speak to these 2 people or 3 people about this. And so that process is something that I follow. And I have a lot of shared joy with certain people, with whom I can discuss some of my deep interests. Yes.
So that itself is something also very interesting as a perspective, right?
And the other thing, Krista, is that in today's world, everything is available. I can spend the next 1 year literally not leave my study and read 100 books on neuroscience. It's all available in the form of hard copies, in the form of ebooks, in the form of podcasts, in the form of conversations. There's so much content that is available to anybody, and this is the world that we are living in. So what is the differentiator between person A and person B? Because it is just the time and effort they have spent in going deeper. It's how much they are storing between their ears, how much of, what should I say, content they have literally here in this little space between the ears, for example, I know that I can, talk about neuroscience in my sleep, but I can definitely not talk about tech in my sleep or design in my sleep, or, there are so many other skills, right?
You're talking about working with leaders and neuroscience. Can you tell us something that is kind of like a myth, right? Like most people think about this is what it is, but actually that's not true in in the area of neuroscience?
The first thing is that, the history of the corporate world and the way it has evolved treats human beings like resources, like a sort of a part of a machine almost. And even yesterday, I have news from my circle of friends how somebody was laid off, and even the laying off process is almost like plucking out a defective part from a machine and just throwing it. So the way banks and big tech companies lay off people is they just tell them that from tomorrow you're not needed. And if you know the science of the brain, you will know that this is the most damaging thing that you can do to a person, because it directly impacts their sense of security. And that has an outsized effect on their emotional makeup, which has an outsized effect on their performance. And yet we expect that person to go home and be, all right with whatever has happened. It is ridiculous the way the corporate sector is designed today. And I'm very happy that I can say this here, because I'm not working for an organization, but this is something that really needs to be fixed. Essentially, our brains are actually all the time in a sea of emotional balance. So we exist pretty much on an emotional balance at all points of time. And within the balance, the cognitive performance happens of any human being, anybody. Now, acts like throwing people out of, employment with 1 day notice and those kind of things, they actually disturb the emotional balance of the brain, and it has an outsized effect on performance. So this is just one of the things. The second thing is that we have a range of emotions, and there is fear, anger, sadness, shame. These are all called survival emotions. And then you have thriving emotions, which is joy, trust, excitement. These are some of the thriving emotions. We talk about it in our London Protocol of Emotions, which is one of our proprietary models, and we have it in our book, Brains Inspiring Businesses, which is available now. Anyway, so the thing is
we'll definitely get that discussing your book.
I couldn't help it, because I was trying to illustrate why leaders need to, know about the science of emotions. So survival emotions, they actually lead you to a response where you can have fight or flight or freeze as, one of the responses. And that happens when the human being feels threatened. So fear, anger, sadness, shame, disgust, these are emotions that basically evoke the survival emotions. And when survival emotions are evoked, then the energy of the human system, biologically, it goes inward. It goes inward. So just to give you an example, if you go into the workplace and if a colleague says something to you which makes you feel threatened, all your mental faculties will actually go into figuring out why he or she said that, and therefore what do you need to do to protect yourself in the situation. It's a very normal human reaction, but that will lead to certain behaviors where you may be perceived as uncooperative, as somebody who's not a team player. People will perceive you like this. So it is very important for everybody in an organization to understand that, if I'm constantly in a survival mode, what is it that other people are thinking about me? Now imagine this happening to the leader. If a leader is constantly in a survival mode, and trust me, there are many leaders like that who are constantly in a survival mode, the kind of emotional energy that they are building in their teams is absolutely not conducive to performance. So, the old style strategy, maybe of the 1960s or 70s, which is very command and control. where the leader says do this and then everybody does this, that is slowly actually going out of salience. And also the young generation don't align to this way of behavior and thinking. Recently I met this girl, she was 30, and she was saying how she quit the company because this environment was just getting to her. Like, she was physically unwell because the environment in office was always state of crisis. So then the task of the leader is really to understand that how to actually create a state of abundance, a state of joy and trust and thriving in the organization, so that people feel safe and they are able to perform. This realization is not there. I can't say that it's like this in every organization, but in plenty of organizations, this is a problem, because the emphasis is always on meeting the numbers and always delivering performance of numbers. But organizations essentially are where people get together. People give the best of their efforts in order to meet a certain goal. And therefore, there are social implications of an organization existing. It is not just about the numbers. And if that is the way your organizations are built, it is going to not lead to a very successful organizational culture. You see, so the thing is, people talk about diversity and inclusion and belongingness. All of this gets addressed if you give people a safe space to be who they are. And that is what neuroscience teaches us. Now, another clarification I want to make here is that when people talk about neuroscience, they say, oh, are you a neuroscientist? But the truth is that you don't need to be a neuroscientist to appreciate how our nervous system works. I speak to my son, who is a grade 10 biology student, and he knows enough about the brain and the nervous system to know that, how the emotional system gets impacted when there are triggers. And that's really what you need to know in order to bring good practices in the workplace and to build a culture of performance. And this, what I'm telling you, goes against, I think, the common understanding of what performance means in an organization. The other thing that I'm noticing with my work is that more and more women leaders are taking a lot of interest in this science of emotions. So I very regularly get invitations from women leaders to talk about the science of emotions to their teams, or to explain to them also how it works. Firstly, it's maybe just the style of the women leaders, that they believe in collaboration and co-creation and getting along and taking the community with them and making sure that everybody's looked after. And that's exactly how their brain works. Our hormonal system, women's hormones, they have a huge impact on the way we operate in the world. And one of the key hormones is, let's say, oxytocin. Like, a lot of moms work in organizations, their brains are bathed with oxytocin. They know how it feels to have a safe environment, which happens, and a loving and trusting environment at work. They know it. So they try to keep creating that in their workplaces. They try to make sure that any issues, they get resolved amicably and people are connecting with each other. And that's how women leaders do operate, in my experience. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that hormones are responsible for things like the feeling of competitiveness, the feeling of who is the winner in any situation, the feeling of making sure that everybody's collaborating, how everyone is getting along. All of these evoke a hormonal response in everybody who comes to work. So, like I was mentioning to you that I'm trying to work on a game. So the objective of that is to actually make people aware of how is their emotion running over a day? Like, for example, a series of situations, and how does my emotion act up? And that self-awareness itself leads to emotional regulation and being able to look at regular work situations in a way that you give your best reaction in that situation. So, we say there's a lot of advice like respond instead of reacting. Respond instead of reacting. But how will you respond instead of reacting if you don't know what is your emotional response to triggers? So that's why, self-awareness is important, and understanding of your mind-body system is important. And that's where applied neuroscience actually comes in and helps.
And you don't have to be a neuroscientist to understand how it works in the workplace, right?
Not at all.
Yeah. How you can apply
Not at all. Like, I have friends who are wonderful botanists. They know names of flowers. They know exactly what fertilizer goes into what flower, but they don't have a certificate in botany. They have built this knowledge over time because they're interested in flowers and building gardens. And that's what is needed actually from the corporate community, from the leadership community, that find out, go into this area, find out. There are a lot of resources available.
It's also interesting that in the past, organizations are always about numbers, right? Being competitive. And now the conversation is slowly shifting towards being collaborative, cooperation, and working together. Because as you mentioned, if the team feels safe, they create better results. And to create better results, it's just not about pushing people to create better results. It's about creating a space for them and enabling them positively in that way. But in your case, I love this phrase that you said, this creating a state of abundance. How can leaders, maybe you can share some strategies here, how can leaders create the state of abundance within their own business unit or their own department? On a day-to-day basis, if they could, how could they show their team that they are actually thinking of creating this state or are in the state of abundance?
This is where I will even quote like my mentor, Dr. Paul Brown. People actually know what makes them tick. So there is no such thing that people need someone to save them. Everyone knows, what really they get excited about, or what makes them feel threatened, or that amount of maturity does exist. But if the leaders are constantly in a state of crisis, and I'm just, bringing that example back, they actually exude a certain kind of culture in their teams, which does not promote performance, firstly, and secondly, it makes everybody else feel unsafe. So the thing is, then the task is of the leader to actually first themselves ground themselves, then be calm and find strategies to manage their own emotional response before they can put the team together. That's one. Secondly, again, I'm going to quote Paul, is that the brain is an organ of relationship. The brain is an organ of relationship.
I love that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in Asian cultures, the brain is always looked as an organ of cognitive performance, which means how good you are in math, or how many analytical outputs can you produce?
How much can you memorize?
How much can you memorize? And how brilliant are you at spewing facts and figures? That is very much, I come from the Indian culture, and I can't tell you how much that is valued, the ability to
also the Chinese culture values that immensely.
Unfortunately, we have built this world where these are the behaviors and traits that are looked upon as, like really higher order. Parents are constantly teaching their kids on, be the number one math student, be the number one whatever performer in school. However, the brain doesn't work unless the quality of relationship is good between the two people engaged. So for example, I'll just bring the example of school. You will always notice that children perform well when their relationship with their teacher is good. There are many examples of this where my history teacher is really good, so I love history. My English teacher is very good, so I love English. It's the same thing in organizations. If your boss is good, you will like to work in that organization. And if your boss is terrible, you will quit. So the quality of relationships between you and your superior and you and your teammates actually define your output at work. They create the climate of performance at work.
It actually starts with the leader themselves to be fully aware of how they are projecting themselves or their emotions out there to their team, or creating positive emotions.
I'll give you another interesting neuroscience fact that the human eye is surrounded by this white portion. It is very interesting to note that human beings have this as an evolutionary mechanism to be able to read expressions in the faces of other people. You will go into a room, you can see the faces of your friends, and you will know who may be a little sad or who may be a little off. And you will say, she was looking a little off, and why? Because there's something in the eye of that person which you caught, and you can't really put words to that. But this is an evolutionary mechanism by which we read the emotions of people around us, and it allows us to protect ourselves. When language was not so developed, so many thousands of years ago, people would read. They understood how to read other people because it is a self-protection mechanism. And all of us have it. We all have it, and we use it all the time. So a leader doesn't have to do much, they just have to exude this kind of, that sense of assurance. And if they have it, people will read them. Their team members will read them. And when they read them, and the quality of relationship, again, the biggest tool a leader has is conversation. And because we talk so much, we have forgotten the value of the conversation. Like, I have 10 minutes with you. What is the quality of conversation that I can have with you? A conversation is a relationship creator between two people. So yes, I can do Lego serious play and I can do 100 fancy things in a team. But really, the most important tool that a leader has is a conversation. A conversation, the act of listening with attention, and his or her own persona and response mechanism. These are very simple tools to create that sense of abundance.
So if anyone out there is listening to us and thinking, okay, how can I be a better leader? So we should start with these things, right? Have a better quality conversation. Really be intentional. Can I say that? Intentional in that conversation itself, and not just think, okay, I've got to have 10 conversations with people, therefore these are my 10 conversations. But again, coming back to it, what is the depth of that conversation?
Yes, and the attention. And the thing is that a lot of our behavior is actually led by non-conscious elements. Like I can consciously talk to you, but if you see me and if you see my expressions and I see your expressions, there's a non-conscious exchange that's going on between us, and you will be able to gauge me better with that non-conscious exchange. And this is happening all the time in organizations as well. So the power of the non-conscious exchange is way more than the conscious exchange that happens. I mean, we read in books also, talk in a way that people really understand you, or so that the non-conscious exchange between the leader and his or her team happens again through the physical presence of the leader, the way they communicate, the way their eyes are, expressing their deepest intentions. And the other thing is that you can't fake this. You cannot fake this. Because again, no leader should make the assumption that their team members are unintelligent. All of us are very intelligent. We are very intelligent in assessing whether a situation is working to our favor or not. It's a survival skill. It's called survival mindset. We all have it. So make no assumptions that people are not able to read you. People can read you. So you can't fake it,
So is there no truth to fake it till you make it?
I mean, maybe a leader can fake it one day, but cannot fake it endlessly.
All the time, right? Yeah, it's not all the time. Put on that fake mode all the time. Yeah, and that's also maybe as a side note. That's the reason why, even though this is a podcast and we're only going to put this out as audio, all the time I record on video, because I believe that in video, it's easier to see each other, of course, but it's also easier to understand. Like, I understand your point by nodding. I understand your point by smiling. I just thought of a memory when you talked about, how students perform better if you're like their teachers. I'm thinking to myself, yes, I had some horrible, horrible teachers. And now I realize why, that subject was particularly difficult. It's because I didn't like the teacher. Or the teacher was nasty or said something mean, right? When we have that kind of facial expressions that come with the audio, we have a much richer quality of conversation too. Now, I want to know more about your book.
So this book was written by 13 coaches from different parts of the world. So truly it's a global production. And all of them practiced from the lens of applied neuroscience, and they were all students of Dr. Paul Brown. My chapter in this book is on mindfulness, and Dr. Paul gives the perfect introduction. And all the points that he talks about, I think some of them I have covered in this podcast, that why should leaders understand applied neuroscience. And the rest of the book is really about various behavioral issues that come up at the workplace and how you can solve it. So, for example, there's a chapter called Brain-Powered Confidence by Caroline Brewin, and she goes into what is it that interferes with the process of confidence, and therefore what can a person do about it. And then there are chapters on stress and how stress interferes with decision making, with attention, with motivation in the workplace. There is one chapter on looking at an organization as a machinery, as a piece of machinery, whereas human beings are largely social. And how that old definition of organizations is not going to work anymore, and what are the problems associated with that. Another chapter on saying, what if the future organizations were to be called a welcoming organization, where every employee feels that they are welcome to be who they are and they can contribute. The other thing is, again, an issue where over monitoring kind of removes the agency of the employee, where you're always being suspected of someone who wants to take the shortcut, which is not true. I think a lot of people actually don't like that. They like the flexibility of deciding when to do what, but they don't like being suspected of not wanting to contribute enough to the workplace. So, those kind of things. And then there is one last chapter which actually traces the history of neuroscience and how it came into becoming such a big area of study. There is also one more chapter which I want to talk about, where we look at the importance of using excitement as emotion in the workplace. because excitement can completely change, the collective emotion of a team. So
I
it's
see.
not used enough. And if it's used more often, basically it will lead to more dopamine production in the brain. And that is a very highly, very, very important neurotransmitter which promotes, even physiological well being. Means in the body, you need dopamine to feel good. So these are some of the, chapters I've quickly mentioned. My own chapter is on mindfulness, and it explores mindfulness and hopefully gives reason to leaders to try it for themselves, not get intimidated by the word, but even 10 to 15 minutes of mindfulness can really activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is needed to deal with all the cortisol or the stress inducing hormone that builds up in your body, over the course of the day.
Interestingly, Nandini, when you talk about mindfulness, does it involve a process or some steps that you can do or take by yourself?
Absolutely. Mindfulness is the one tool that every person can develop. It starts with taking 5 to 10 minutes out every day and consistently spending time with your thoughts and observing them. So the initial reaction can be one where you feel very uncomfortable. The body also reacts to mindfulness. Some people have an outsized body reaction, like they can even have pain, but that is just your body trying to adjust to a new way of your mind existing. The trick is to come back to it. The trick is to not let go of the practice, but come back to it and then slowly work your way up. And you will face the barrier from your mind body because it's not used to it. The other thing which I want to say about the brain is that the brain hates change. The brain does not like anything new. And the adult brain hates change even more.
That's the reason why people are so set in their ways and we don't want to do certain things. We don't want to try new things, right? Because we just love being who we are, the old version.
True. And, one of the things that I hear a lot of adults say is that, oh, I'm like this only. I'm like this only. To me, that's a red flag because the sign of mental wholesomeness is adaptability. You can check this out in any research, on mental wellness, that the sign of a healthy mind is adaptability, that you're able to adapt to new situations, to new challenges. And as we age, we have to remember this and we have to keep our adaptability hacks up. We have to really work on it because the brain is designed not to be adaptable as we grow older.
Okay, so in that way, mindfulness is one of the things that can help us with it.
Absolutely, it can. Because the other thing that mindfulness does is that it helps you to observe your own thought and therefore the resultant action. So, for example, so we know that our brain has some 60, 70,000 thoughts in a day. This is a very popular meme. I don't know whether it's 60,000, it could be 100,000 also. Depends on the kind of brain, or it could be less. But it does have a lot of thoughts. And if we can develop this habit of observing our thoughts, then we can be mindful about the resultant action. And while this sounds very simple, it is actually very hard to do.
A lot of times when you want to sit and observe your thoughts, that's so hard. I think that's how people start whipping out their smartphones in order to deal with that discomfort of watching their thoughts.
Yes. And I think we have to perhaps retrain our brains to be without a device. Because a device is a very convenient, tool to basically just focus our attention back into a device. And then, it's not letting our neurons make new connections. The device is not letting our neurons make new connections. It's terrible for creativity. It's terrible for creative thinking. And we have to retrain our brains. And the other thing is that when you study neuroscience, you realize that all the good old practices are so relevant. And yeah, and even devices, like one can have more discipline around devices. Just stepping off devices can restore our neural function. It can activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is very important for us to feel a sense of balance at the end of the day. So, yeah. I mean, now, of course, I think of everything from the lens of neuroscience. So it's a bit of a problem because everyone in my house protests. There she goes again.
In a way, that would be helpful for them. But of course, like what you mentioned, it is quite hard to stay away from devices, especially today when it's so easy to get attached. And that is like our nanny, right? Like for kids, that is their nanny. The device is the entertainment and nanny all rolled in one. So Nandini, we had quite an interesting conversation about the brain, applied neuroscience, your upcoming game, that's pretty exciting. And of course, your book, where you talk about mindfulness. We've talked a lot about the brain. What I want to know is, what was Nandini like growing up?
That's a very interesting question. I was quite introvert till grade 8. I remember just spending more time with myself till I actually decided to change that in grade 8 because I suddenly realized, I don't have friends. If you ask me, I was always intensely curious. I think for me, the defining emotion has always been curiosity. How do things work? What is the inner story? So I've lived my life with this thing that what you see is not the full truth. There's always more to a situation. There's always more. I have always had this intense curiosity towards, finding out things. And it's still a very dominant trait. And I always was very affected by violence. I mean, in fact, it's very well known in my family that I can't watch a violent movie. I don't like too much of conflict. I don't like to watch war. I don't like to watch too much distress. So, and maybe, there's something in me that wants to help people fix that.
So interesting, right? I mean, sometimes when you look back into your own past or childhood, I would say sometimes a lot of the clues are there, that will shape us later in life. But it's just, sometimes we just never look deeply into that. And that's what sometimes I enjoy most, asking all my podcast guests, what were you like growing up? What kind of childhood do you have? And I think that gives me a lot of interesting stories too from their past when they tell me things about themselves that they probably never would have thought about if they didn't think of it.
Yes, absolutely. And when you ask this question, I'm getting more like thoughts, right? Like right now, I do not discuss this with anyone before. Like the other thing which I feel very much is for the quiet people, because the quiet people get left out in a room, and I know how it feels to be the quiet person. And I say this to a lot of my clients, and especially Asian clients, I say, just because you're quiet, it doesn't mean that you don't have anything to share. Just because you're quiet, it doesn't mean that you don't have anything to share. You may have a lot to share. So don't belittle what you know.
And I think sometimes also because we tend to equate someone who talks a lot with a lot of knowledge, right? Some of my friends, the quieter ones, when they do speak, it really surprises, some of us, because they think and they process it, and then they come up with some really brilliant idea. Sometimes we do need to give people that space, right, to slowly think and speak, or maybe even do it in their own way, so that it's not just all the excited ones talking in a meeting.
Yes, yes. And again, back to leadership, you might lose out some absolutely brilliant ideas, brilliant thoughts, brilliant insights by not inviting the quieter ones to share.
So, Nandini, now that we've talked a little bit about everything in your life, I would like to ask you, what are the 3 things that I can really take to heart after listening to today's conversation?
Maybe I should ask you that question, Krista.
I love talking to coaches and facilitators because they're so interesting in the way that they would rather that the participant tells them, right? What I learned from you is that the brain is definitely an organ of relationship. People need to understand each other, and using our brains better in that way to build relationships rather than just output, spewing facts and figures and numbers. One of the key takeaways for myself is that let's really look at the brain in a new way rather than just our brain. Yeah, our brain is just organ that we're using for memory, we're using for this, but actually it's not.
Yes, yes. And in a huge way.
Yeah, in a huge way. And have we actually maximized everything that we know about the brain based on applied neuroscience?
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, if you read some of the very serious researchers, who will not do podcasts, who are just doing their research, they are amazed at the intricacy of this amazing, mechanism all of us have. They are amazed. And I don't think the world has even found out more than maybe 20% of what needs to be known about the mind. The mind is, it leads to a huge sense of, wonder, and you feel very humble when you get to read about the brain, because it is so beautiful. It's like there are 86 billion neurons. It's like the Milky Way, that many stars. It's like that. And each neuron can make 10,000 connections, synapses. Everyone's brain has this amazing architecture.
And we are the only creatures, right, that we can talk about our brain with the brain.
Yeah, that is such a wonderful, wonderful comment you made, Krista. It's true. What you said is absolutely true.
Yeah, we can think about ourselves while we're thinking about ourselves. It's like this meta thing happening, right? This meta thing happening is like, we're the brain, we're thinking about the thoughts, but the thought is also on another level, right? So sometimes that fascinates me to no end.
That's a lovely articulation.
So I came up with one takeaway. So what about you personally? What would you like the listener to go home with, besides the part I said about the brain being an organ of relationship?
I would like people to reflect on this. That if they think of all the situations and conditions and their growing up milestones, how did the quality of relationship impact their development as a human being, as a performer, as someone who could shine? How did the quality of their relationships, right from the time they were very small, family, teachers, uncles, aunts, cousins, how did the quality of relationship impact them? I would really like people to reflect on this. And who will they spend time with? It's like, if you had a full day and you could choose the people you want to spend time with, who will you spend time with? Will you spend time with someone with whom your quality of relationship is great, or would you spend time with someone where the quality of relationship is not so great?
And it changes, right, as we grow older or grow up.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's fine. That's fine. That's evolution. We are supposed to move on, And I also do therapy work, so a lot of us cannot move on. A lot of us are stuck in our past, and we are not able to move on. And there's a lot of guilt, which is unnecessary.
That would be a totally different episode with you.
Yes, that would be a totally different episode.
But that would be such an interesting one, a fascinating one as well, because that is where I think some of our greatest growth comes from, right? By understanding ourselves, and therefore we can understand others better.
Yes, absolutely. And it's your journey. I think all of us, doesn't matter what we own, we don't own, what we perform, we don't perform, we all own our own journeys.
Yeah, I love that. That quote right here. We all own our own journeys. Yes, we do. And so let's try to make our own journeys as insightful as we can.
And enjoyable.
Yeah, enjoyable.
That neurotransmitter, joy, excitement, love, trust, we can create it in our lives.
I just so want to continue and ask you, how do you create joy and excitement, all those in your life? And to me, that itself is something for people to ponder, right? Like, how do you create that in your life? Not even your life, in your work, in your life, in your family, in everything that you do for yourself and for others.
Yes, and there are strategies for that as well.
Okay, because we are running short of time, so I'm going to ask you, Nandini, where can people find you online? If you want to continue this conversation with you.
Well, there is a website, ironconsulting.com. My email ID is there. I have an Instagram, Nandini_stories. LinkedIn is a great place to actually say hello to me. I'm quite active on LinkedIn.
So thank you, Nandini, for a fascinating conversation about our brain. Also, how we can create better workplaces, or even create better relationships. I would say workplaces, create better relationships with the people around us, the people who work with us, for us, work alongside us. So thank you, Nandini.
That's all for today's episode of Womenpreneur Asia. I hope you learned a thing or two about the fascinating science behind leadership and relationships. Remember, it's not about who's the smartest, but who can build the strongest connections. And your brain can help you do that. Instead of just thinking of a brain as a cognitive organ, think of it as a relationship organ. A big thanks to our guest today, Nandini, for sharing her insights on applied neuroscience. And of course, thank you to our sponsor, Reebok Studio. For more inspiring stories and strategies from Asian women entrepreneurs, don't forget to subscribe to the Womenpreneur Asia podcast.